Stan?
Yes.
Can you explain why the wind's light after a squall and how can you avoid that or best get out of it?
The wind's light behind a squall. Let me show you in the next slide. I'll get to that. But basically, it's because you have a downdraft, and behind the squall, the downdraft is in the opposite direction from the prevailing wind. So it kind of cancels. So you get light air behind a squall, and you will get light air behind either a pop-up squall or a dipole squall. Either one behind it is bad. And then I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the best way to get away from that light air is to jibe onto port. Because the squalls move as if they're a turbo sled. They're on starboard jibe, they're going about the speed of a turbo sled, and they're going off to the right. And so if you're on port, you tend to diverge from the light air behind them. If you're on starboard, you tend to just sort of follow them along. So the exit is typically safest on port. But I'll get to that in a moment. So the dipole squalls, they self-propagate. They can last for hours. Sometimes they come in lines, but there'll be just a series of them at night. If you want to stay with them, and the only boats that can stay with them are boats that are the right speed. And the right speed to stay with a dipole squall is about a conventional sled or a TP52. And what will happen is they can jibe back and forth in front of one of those squalls. And for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, they have to jibe off of the headers, which is a very unnatural thing to do. But nevertheless, if they're willing to do that and jibe off of the headers, they can stay with the squall. And I've stayed with the squall on a sled for 4 hours during a given night. And if you do that, you'll be going about 2 knots faster on average than the boats that aren't with the squall. And then the next morning you do roll call and you're crushed, the rest of the fleet. So it's worth giving it a go if you have the opportunity. But maxis are too fast, and most other boats are too slow. You kind of have to be the speed of a sled to do that, because they're just right. You avoid the area behind the squall. Port jibe is the best exit, because the squall is on starboard, because the squall is moving with the upper level wind, which is to the right of the surface wind that we sail in. You go to school on the first squall of a given night that happens around midnight. And to a remarkable degree, the squalls on a given night will all work the same. So if you try jibing in front of a squall on a given night, and then you let it, you went too far on one side and you got out of the shift, well, use what you learned. And then when there's a watch change, you make sure to explain what you've learned to the incoming watch. The other thing that's really important to do in terms of going to school on a squall is have a hockey puck handy and have everybody on deck know that the first thing you do when you see a squall is you start taking bearings on it. And then you'll pretty quickly figure out where your incoming lane is, on starboard and on port. But the incoming lane is a different angle relative to the boat because of the fact that the squalls are moving to the right. So the incoming lane on starboard is going to be further aft, and on port it's going to be further forward in the boat. But it's really helpful to have that calibrated for a given night, so you know when a squall is likely to get to you and when you want to jibe onto port. And if you're a sled, you can time your jibes to stay in front of the thing. Avoid squalls after dawn. What happens at dawn, just before dawn, is the sun hits the tops of the clouds and it turns that orange color and it's beautiful. But as soon as it does that, the squall collapses. And when the squall collapses, you get a large area of light air that's semi-persistent, and that light air lasts till about noon. And the best way to avoid that is don't try to monkey with the squalls anytime after 6 a.m. local. But within a couple hours of when the sun is going to hit the tops of them, just get onto port if you have to, and find yourself a clear patch of sky, so that when the sun hits the tops of the clouds, you're nowhere near a squall. But that's a hugely easy way to lose the Transpac. I think on Hiawatha once we had a huge lead, and we were too close to a squall. It collapsed on us at dawn, and we saw the sled fleet sail by us on both sides as we sat in this sort of hazy area of light air. It's a terrible way to lose the Transpac. So what I do as navigator is I'm always on deck from an hour or so before that period, just to make sure that we give up on the squalls and find ourselves a clear patch of sky before dawn. There's another thing that happens during a transpac that you'll only recognize if you do a whole bunch of them, is there's a convergence zone. And it's a line of clouds. It's a kind of a convergence zone where you're really moving into the trades. It's a big, long, persistent left shift. And some people will tell stories at the bar after the race about this lefty squall. Well, it wasn't. It was the convergence zone. And if you're in a situation where you wish you were further south, that convergence zone can be great because you get this big lefty and off you go, and you get to change lanes a little bit to the south. In some cases where you like where you are, that left shift can be strong enough so that you actually change to a JT or to a reaching spinnaker for a while to get through the damn thing. But nevertheless, you'll see that in about half the races, and most of the time people confuse it for just a weird squall that shifted the other way around. But in fact, it's this big, long, linear feature that's the convergence zone. Okay, this is a cross-section of a pop-up squall. This graphic I actually stole from Mike Dvorak, weather guy. But here's the boat, here's the gust front in front. The light zone behind the squall, and in this case, prior to this, there was upwelling that caused the clouds to tumble up vertically, and at some point it started to rain, and you had a downwelling, and then you get breeze coming down, and it's light behind because the breeze coming down is blowing counter to the overall system wind. And then it's windier in front because the wind coming down in front is adding to the system breeze. But the wind coming down is cool, it even feels cool, and it kills off the squall. And as soon as it kills it off, the clouds vanish in minutes. It can be remarkably quick. This is what happens at night. This is a dipole squall. This is again a cross section. I don't remember who I stole this from. But you see there's upwelling in front, and then there's downwelling behind. And the upwelling from front is really a cylinder of upwelling, and that's what causes the wind to toe in front of one of these dipole squalls. But you've got an upwelling cylinder, and then you've got this downwelling cylinder. And because they're separate cylinders, the cool pool from the downwelling doesn't kill off the upwelling. And so these things can last for hours. But as soon as the sun heats up the top of them, then the whole thing turns into this big white area of haze and light air. And that's why you don't want to be anywhere close to it in the morning. So this is a top view. This is one, as you can tell, that I drew by hand. But the system breeze is blowing up the page. The squall is on starboard, so it's tootling off to the right, about the speed of the turbo sled. There's light air behind because the downwelling is countering the system breeze, and the breeze behind is also shifted outward because the downwelling is causing those shifts. But then in front, the breeze is towed in. And it's towed in because there's an upwelling pole cylinder, right about here. And so then the funny thing is, if you're in your sled or your TP52 and you're driving back and forth and you're trying to stay in front of this thing, you jibe and you go on starboard and you go out here, and just as you're getting out here to the edge, you get this gorgeous header, and you're roaring along, pointing right at the finish line, and everything's good, and then the navigator says, we've got to jibe. And everybody thinks you're insane because you've got this beautiful header and you're jibing off this gorgeous header. And then you jibe and then you pass back in front of it, initially at terrible angles, and then pretty soon you get another gorgeous header, and then you jibe off of that again. And to the extent you can go back and forth and stay in front of this thing, you're gaining because this squall is moving downwind several knots faster than the system breeze. So relative to boats that are out in the open, you're going to be making good a couple of knots faster than them across the race course, sailing in about 6 or 8 knots more wind. But nevertheless, you have to explain this to the crew ahead of time, because the first time you ask them to jibe off this gorgeous header, they'll think you're crazy. But if you make sure people know what to expect ahead of time, they'll let you get away with it, and then once it starts to work, they'll think you're a genius. But it only really works for boats that are the right speed. If you're in a Cal 40, you see a squall like this coming, there's going to be a net shift to the right. And so what you want to do is get the boat on port early, and then as the squall goes overhead, you take advantage of that right shift, so you get a nice header on port, and then you stay on port after the squall goes over, because the squall's on starboard and it's going off to the right. You're on port, so you're diverging of it. So if you stay on port, you have the best chance of avoiding the light air behind it. So if you're on a slower boat, you tee the boat up on port, get on port, about the same time you get the right shift, or just before you get the right shift, and then you stay on port until the squall is long gone and you're unlikely to sail in the light air behind it, because you want to absolutely minimize the time that you're following along behind it on starboard. If you're in a boat like Comanche or Alfa Romeo or a really fast boat, you're going faster than the squalls, and so you just avoid them. It's not worth trying to pass just in front of one and get a brief acceleration, because the risk of missing it and getting in the light zone is too great. So instead, we just jibe around to stay in the clear sky and avoid the damn things, because you don't stay in them long enough to be worth it. And the same thing would be true of multi-hulls. It's just not worth horsing around with them. Questions? Yes?
What's the boat speed you're looking at to be able to play in the squall?
I'm not sure that the boat speed itself is always the same, but my impression is that the wind in front of one of these squalls is enough higher so that a sled is just about perfect to be able to sail in that accelerated breeze in front of the squall and end up netting out a VMG that's about the same as the squall. And so the only time I've been able to stay with one of these things and jibe in 12 times in front of them has been in a sled. And TP52s are about the same speed in that situation, so I'm thinking they're about right also.
Thank you.
Other question? So an overview of the dipole squall tactics. The squalls move 15 degrees to the right of the surface wind and about as fast as the surface wind that is unaffected by the squall. So it's about the same speed and about the same angle as a turbo sled. Conventional sleds and TP52s are about the right speed to jibe in front of them, but they got to jibe off the headers, which is a very unnatural thing to do. Slower boats, you jibe to port for the overall right shift, you sail deep on port through the squall, you stay on port until you're clear of the light air behind. In faster boats, you just avoid the damn things altogether. Yes?
So you're sailing along, it's nighttime, but you hopefully have a full moon so you can sort of see the clouds and see the squalls coming. What other senses are there? Rain, and when is the wind before the rain before the wind? How do you know when you're in it, when you gotta get out?
If it's the Transpac these days, they generally hold it when there's a moon. In the old days, we would have Transpacs with no moon at all. And in some ways, those were the coolest because they were the hardest. But nowadays, there's almost always a moon. And so then you can just see them. In the old days, when you raced without a moon, occasionally, then the absence of stars was a good indication. On some boats will carry radar so that they can track the squalls. I tend to think it's not worth it, because if you have radar, the implication is somebody has to look at the damn thing, and you try to do a Transpac with a small crew as you can. And so I think it's better to have the crew on deck, really teed into it and really watching for the absence of stars and watching for the squalls that you see. I think that's the better approach. So I generally don't recommend the addition of radar to a maxi for it. But if there is a radar on the boat, I'll use it. Is that your question?
Yeah, and then what about the rain?
I find that the dipole squalls tend to have rain first, when the pop-up squalls tend to have the wind first. And I'm not sure whether that's consistent with the old rhyme or whether it's opposite of the rhyme, but there's that rhyme that the square rigger sailors used to use. Wind before rain, soon you'll set your topsails again. Rain before wind, you beware your halyard's mind. Something that's terrible, right? there was some truth to it, and it was interesting to see that the dipole squalls, which tend to be stronger and longer lasting, yeah, I think you get the rain first. That's one indication. But the very fact that it's a nighttime squall means that it's highly likely to be a dipole. Okay, cloud streets. Whenever you fly to and from Hawaii, look out the window, get a window seat, and watch out the window. And you'll see the second half of the trip, you'll see that maybe for half the time for the second half of the trip, you see these long stripes of clouds in the trades. And people call them streets of clouds. And the streets tend to be lined up, upwind, downwind. And they're very stable features. They move to the right a little bit. So this is my drawing of cloud streets looking from above. The system breeze is blowing up the wind, but these streets, they're kind of lined up with the system, with the surface wind, but they're slowly moving to the right. And so it's almost like they're on starboard jibe. But the interesting thing is that if you're on starboard jibe and you're on the edge of one of these streets, you're pretty stable. You know, you stay on that edge. And there's about a knot more wind on the edge. And I think the right-hand edge is a little better, but there's about a knot more wind on the edges of the cloudy zone relative to the sunny zone in the center. And then the funny thing is that you have to be very perceptive to see them when you're on a boat. Because when you're on a boat, you don't see the streets, you just see that, yeah, there's some cloud over there, and there's some clouds over there, but it's not obvious that they're streets. So you really have to convince yourself that this is happening when you're looking down at them from an airplane, and then when you're on the boat, you have to really kind of get your head around it to try to detect when you're in a situation where there's streets. The other optical illusion is clouds are never as far away as they look. So if you're in the clear zone, you'll look at the clouds on the horizon and you'll say, oh, let's go over under port and get on the edge of that street. And the people on deck will tell you that you're crazy. They'll say that's 20 miles away. Port pole is unfavored by, X degrees. There's no way it can pay to spend all that distance to get over to the street. And the correct answer is, well, let's just go over for a minute or two. So you drive over to port, and then it's astonishing how quickly you get there. And you get there within 5 minutes. And it's partially because the clouds are moving towards you when you're on port, but it's partially because they're not as far away as they look. So you get over to them, and then you jibe on the edge, and then you'll say, oh, that's interesting, there is a knot more wind. So the boat's going a half a knot faster. And then you sail along for the rest of the afternoon on the edge of that street, and then you gain 4 or 5 miles against your competitors that are sailing in the clear sky. So it's a subtle thing. There's a lot of people who've done a number of Transpacs who say they've never seen a cloud street. Well, they have. They just didn't see it for what it was. And the way to convince yourself that these things are real and they're prevalent is when you fly home, get a window seat and look out. And you'll see that they're really common. Question? Yes?
What longitude you start to see those?
Kind of late in the slot cars leg, probably the second half of the slot cars leg, you start to see them. They're kind of high 130s, 140s.
And what happens if you continue to sail through it on port? Mistakenly.
Well, you'll get a little bit more breeze under the clouds, but then eventually you'll get out from under it, and then you'll go back into the lighter air, in the sunny zone. But I think there's just a tick more breeze in the clouds, and I think the reason the clouds are there is there's an upwelling, there's convection that's coming from both sides and going up into the clouds. And of course, anytime you see a cloud, that means that air is moving up. So if that air is moving up, it didn't come out of the ocean. It came from the clear zones. And when you see clear sky, that's when air is coming down. And so what's happening, if you look it up in the micro weather textbooks, is that when there's cloud streets, just these little convective cells, where the air is going up in the clear zone and coming down in the cloudy zone. And on the edge of the clouds, that's what you want, is you want that downwelling air that's on its way over to the upwelling that's next to it. You get a tick more breeze. And it's, in the days when you occasionally get a race where there's a whole bunch of sleds sailing side by side, you can see it really clearly. The boat's on the edge of the clouds, so just got a tick more breeze, and they're just making slow gain. But the key is to recognize it for what it is. It's this one linear feature, and it's not as far away as you think. So it's often worth just doing a little bit of port to get over there. So cloud streets summary. Watch out your airplane window to get a feel for them. They're more common than you think. On starboard, you'll stay in a constant position relative to them. On port, you move across them quickly, quicker than it would seem. And then try to sail on the edge of the street. The final shift. So normally in a Transpac, the wind just continues to veer because you got the big high and it's just going to continue to go right. So what you do is you play the right-hand corner. You play it quite hard. You don't want to overstand, but absent the risk of overstanding, you basically hit the shifts on your way there, but you hit that corner. So you get the best port jibe on the way into the islands coming from that right-hand corner. Some years the left-hand corner pays. And how do you tell? Well, when the left-hand corner pays, it's because there's a tropical inverted trough. And it's rumbling along down in the tropics, and the boats for which the left corner pays are going to be just ahead of that trough when they get to the islands. And so down south, there's going to be a left shift, an increasing breeze in front of that inverted trough. So you got to keep your eyes on the weather map, you got to keep your eyes on the tropicals, and you're not just looking for a hurricane. I mean, this approach works in a hurricane. You have to do something that seems a little unnatural. You jibe down to get in front of it to get the shift and the increasing breeze. But nevertheless, this approach always works when it's not a tropical storm, it's just an inverted trough, and the only indication of it is a wave in the isobars. So you got to keep your eye out for that. And I'll give a couple of examples of that. Don't overstand, but aiming for Kalapapa is a good approach. It's I don't like getting into Molokai to the east of Kalapapa. Some people have done enough Kenwood races, so they say they know when it's okay to go in there, but I find it just too risky. So I never try to get into Molokai east of Kalapapa, but I try to head right for Kalapapa. If you get it right, it's great. There's accelerated breeze along the shore of Molokai, but if you get it wrong, and you end up getting a bigger shift than you thought, and you come sailing on port jibe into the center of the channel, well then you can tell the crew that's what you intended all along, and you look good. So planning to come into Kalapapa is it's great if you get it right, and if you get it wrong, it's cheap insurance against overstanding. Keep your eye out for the tropical inverted troughs. Don't overstand, but aiming for Kalapapa provides cheap insurance and margin. And then be aware of that happy hour lefty. So every day when you're truly in the trades, just about happy hour time, just before sunset, you get an increase in breeze for an hour or so and a significant left shift. And so you want to include that in your planning, for the final approach. So this is a fairly typical weather map. The interesting thing is there's a couple of inverted troughs. And take a look at the left-hand one first. You can see how to the northwest of the light air zone, which would be the axis of the trough, you have an increased breeze and it's shifted to the left. And to the northeast of the axis of this trough, you get right shifted breeze and it's lighter air. So it's 10 knots here and it's blowing out of the east, and it's 20 knots here and it's blowing out of the northeast. So this is the thing you're looking for, this characteristic. And you can kind of see why the wind shifts that way by imagining what the isobar looks like. There's an isobar here that goes up and then down, and it's an inverted trough. I don't know if Joe Sinkowitz ever has called them inverted troughs, but a number of weather forecasters do. And it's also, even folks in the Hawaiian Islands talk about this. And we could get some of the locals to tell us. They don't say, well, we're on the, we're head of an inverted trough, but on the backside of an inverted trough, they'd say the wind's going kona. But the Hawaiian Islands have this characteristic that it's windy when it's out of the northeast and it's light when it's out of the east, or even slightly south of east. And the reason for that is because of these inverted troughs that rumble along in the tropics. Here's another example. This one is a much more evident tropical. You can actually see the trough in the isobar, but you can also very clearly see that to the northwest of the trough, it's windy from the northeast, and to the northeast of the trough, it's lighter from the southeast. And so that's the property you're looking for. So imagine that one of these things is rumbling along and it's going to get to Hawaii, a day after you do. Well, you want to be down in front of that thing because you're going to get that left shift, and that left shift is going to be terrific on starboard jibe coming into the islands. Now imagine that one of these things is going to beat you to the finish. Well, now you really want to hit the right-hand corner because behind that thing it's light air. So you want to be further away from it, but behind that thing it's going to be an even bigger right shift. So you really want to be coming in from the right-hand corner. So most Transpacs, the right-hand corner pays, but one Transpac in 5 or 4, the left corner pays for some of the fleet because they're going to get to the finish just before an inverted trough. So you have to keep your eyes out for that. Here's an old-fashioned chart. Oops, no, here's my notes. So the finish. So you jibe for Kalapapa. Coming in east of Kalapapa is dicey unless you grew up doing Kenwood races. You want to sail in the accelerated breeze that's north of Molokai and west of Elio. And I'll show a chart of that in a minute. The ducting along Molokai, many of you will say, wait a minute, that's going to be a divergent shoreline. But the cliffs are so vertical along Molokai that the ducting overcomes that divergent shoreline, so it's okay to go pretty far in. Then from the jibe off of Kalapapa, it depends on your boat and it depends on what kind of year it is. If it's a really windy year and the breeze is out of the northeast, the way it is when it's windy, and you're on the Cal 40, you jibe off of Kalapapa and it's 1 and in. You go straight into the finish on starboard. And you just roar along the northern, roll, relatively speaking. You sail along the northern shore of Molokai, and you're absolutely delighted not to have to jibe in the channel. And then your angles take you right in past Cocoa Head and straight to the finish. So in a windy year, on a heavier, slower boat, it's 1 and in from Kalapapa because the wind is shifted to the left, it's northeaster, and the boat sails deep angles. If it's a light year, the wind is more out of the east, and if you're on a high-performance boat, your angles are a lot tighter. So then you come into Kalapapa, you sail in the accelerated breeze, and you jibe a few times along the northern side of Molokai. You get to Elio, you do a big jibe there, you go over onto port to sail through the accelerated breeze off of Elio. You screw up as much courage as you can to try to do 1 and in from Elio to go far enough south, but you almost never go far enough south. So then you jibe, and then as you're going along through the channel, you jibe again in mid-channel to get south again because you don't want to get in there close to Makapu.